wasn't generating anything new. It was retrieving a structure it once contained. A door erased from its surface, but not from its memory. The outline wasn't built, carved, or assembled. It was reconstructed from whatever the room considers a record. The air carried a static weight, as if the room was processing an old file it had avoided reopening. Reflections didn't approach it. They formed a perimeter, facing the remembered shape as if acknowledging its reinstated form. The spiral symbol dimmed further, as if conserving power for whatever the room was preparing to reveal. And beneath the dim light, the walls shifted with a slow, deliberate tension, subtle enough to miss, precise enough to indicate intent. The room wasn't revealing a forgotten structure. It was reinstating a previous state it had never fully deleted. The door wasn't a spiral construct. Its edges carried human inconsistency, hesitation, pressure, fatigue. The carvings weren't symbols or codes. They were marks left by someone who stood here long before the room learned to replicate itself. The metal around the frame was worn smooth, not by time, but by repeated contact. Someone touched this door often enough to leave a permanent record. The room wasn't remembering architecture, it was remembering a person. And the reconstruction wasn't perfect. The room filled the gaps with approximation, restoring only what it considered essential. The result wasn't a door, it was a retained imprint of the one who made it. The tally marks weren't chronological. They overlapped, repeated, and contradicted each other. Some were deliberate, others carved with unstable hands. This wasn't a record of days, it was a record of attempts. Each mark a cycle the room allowed or denied. The first visitor wasn't tracking time, they were tracking outcomes. The spiral room had given them multiple chances, but not equal ones. The marks showed a pattern of escalation, failure, and forced resets. The room wasn't trapping them, it was testing them. And the inconsistencies weren't errors. They were evidence of the room adjusting its parameters between cycles. The memory stabilized just long enough to reveal a person. Exhausted posture, unstable stance, hands trembling from repeated attempts. This wasn't a reflection or a variant. This was the original occupant, the first individual the room ever recorded. Reflections reacted instantly, pulling back as if acknowledging the one recorded before them. This spiral room didn't begin with me. Its first subject had already shaped its behavior, its rules, and its hunger. The room wasn't showing me a stranger. It showed me its origin, and the stabilization wasn't voluntary. The room held the image only as long as its parameters allowed, revealing just enough to confirm the source of its earliest pattern. The final tally mark was carved with deteriorating precision. Their hands shook violently, not from fear alone, but from depletion. Their breathing fractured into short, uneven bursts. The room wasn't observing them. It was extracting something. Their shadows separated from their movements, lagging behind as if being pulled apart. They weren't counting days or cycles. They were counting failures the room refused to let them complete. Each mark was an unfinished attempt. The spiral consumed, and the extraction followed a pattern. Incremental, measured, calibrated. The room tested how much could be taken before the subject destabilized, adjusting its process with every failed attempt. The first visitor leaned against the door, as if it were the only stable surface left. Their bodies trembled under the strain of repeated extraction. The spiral symbol behind them pulsed weakly, drawing from them with each flicker. This was the room in its early state, hungry, unrefined, learning how to feed. The visitor's strength diminished with every attempt, but they continued pressing forward. The room wasn't imprisoning them, it was evolving through them. And the evolution was incremental. Each pulse adjusted the room's parameters, refining how much it could take and how quickly it could recover. The visitor's collapse wasn't the objective. Their endurance was the data the room required to stabilize its process. When the visitor turned, their eyes were hollow, emptied by repetition. Their mouths formed a single word, not directed at the room, but at whoever followed them. Reflections recoiled, recognizing the warning as part of their own origin. The visitor wasn't cautioning me about the spiral. They were cautioning me about what the room had turned them into. The warning wasn't emotional. It was procedural, an instruction left by someone who had already failed. And the delivery was precise. The room allowed the word to form, then stabilized the moment long enough to ensure it registered. It wasn't a plea or a message. It was a preserved directive, carried forward, because the room found it useful. The collapse wasn't physical. Their body fragmented into static, dissolving into the floor as if the room was reclaiming its data. The spiral symbol pulsed once, absorbing the residue of their final attempt. Reflections reacted with synchronized recoil, as if witnessing their own template being overridden. The first visitor didn't escape. They were erased, integrated, and archived. The room remembered them, but not as a person, only as a function. And the integration didn't end with dissolution. The room redistributed fragments of their pattern across its surfaces, embedding the data into its structure. What remained wasn't a memory or a remnant. It was a baseline the room would use to evaluate every subject that followed. The remembered door stabilized, its surface shifting from memory to the carvings glowed faintly, as if the room was replaying the visitor's attempts through the marks they left behind. Reflection stepped back, recognizing the door as a preserved failure. The spiral room doesn't forget its visitors. It keeps their exits, their mistakes, and their warnings. The door wasn't an escape route. It was a record, and the record was active. The room refined the door's contours with each reconstruction, aligning it with the version it considered most accurate. The marks weren't preserved for sentiment. They were retained because they represented data the room still used. What stood before me wasn't the door they tried to open. It was the room's curated interpretation of their final attempt, maintained because the process remained incomplete. The door opened into a void without structure. No floor, no walls, no geometry. It wasn't a location, it was a memory of one. The first visitor carved this door not to leave, but to warn whoever followed. The room preserved it because the warning served its function. The spiral room doesn't open doors for escape, it opens them for observation. And the observation wasn't passive. The void adjusted its depth in response to my presence, as if recalibrating the parameters the first visitor failed to meet. The space wasn't meant to be entered. It was meant to be understood. a controlled absence, constructed to display the limits of the room's earliest subject. What I was seeing wasn't an exit. It was the room demonstrating the boundary it refused to let anyone cross. The reflections assembled behind me, forming a silent perimeter. The door pulsed with the same rhythm as the spiral symbol, synchronizing memory and intent. A whisper emerged from the void, distorted, fragmented, but directive. The first visitor left an unfinished process. The room expected continuation, not closure. The spiral room doesn't hand out solutions. It hands out incomplete stories and waits for the next subject to proceed. And the expectation was precise. The room aligned, the reflections, positions, matching the configuration recorded during the visitor's final attempt. The whisper stabilized into a pattern rather than a message, a procedural cue meant to trigger the next sequence. Nothing here was meant to conclude. The room preserved only what could be resumed. The door sealed itself without sound. The carvings dimmed, then were erased from the surface, as if the room had completed its demonstration. The spiral room doesn't archive failures for nostalgia. It archives them for utility, and it remembers the ones who didn't finish. And completion wasn't the objective. The room withdrew the reconstructed door with the same precision it used to reveal it, removing the record once its function had been fulfilled. The absence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was the room resetting its parameters, preparing for the next sequence. Nothing here remained, unless it served an ongoing process. The room didn't show me the past. It showed me what it expected to continue. Room 6-7.